Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, March 20th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the popular vote and the Republican Party's inability to win it for the past few decades and what that means moving forward and pretty much why this is actually happening. Now, back in December, I made a video that was discussing the Republican Party's problem with the popular vote, but today I want to hit on a few points that sort of might clarify what I meant to mention back then. And, while I do think that I covered a pretty surface level understanding of why the popular vote does go to the Democratic Party and pretty much just what happened in 2020, I want to show you exactly where we see this happening, not only on the popular vote on the presidential margin, but also in the House of Representatives. Because what you might see is that there's a very big difference between the percentage of seats won by respective parties versus their popular vote margin. On top of that, when the popular vote is very, very close for the Democratic Party or the GOP, one party seems to come ahead by a very large amount, whereas the popular vote margin might indicate that they are in a very close position, which could also suggest implications about gerrymandering on top of that. And, I think that it also suggests something because of the removal of the presidential ballot, because that is a completely separate thing where we really see the effect of down ballot races and really the way that people actually vote beyond the political partisanship of the popular votes, of the presidential election, because obviously that takes the most precedence of every election on that ballot in a presidential election year. But on your screen, you're looking at the 2020 election results, and I haven't used Cook Political Report's website in quite some time now, but I'm bringing this to you because you can take a look at the 2020 National Popular Vote Tracker, and they actually show you, broken down to percentages and pretty much just the amount of votes won by Joe Biden and Donald Trump. 81.281 million won by Joe Biden and 74.222 million votes won by Donald Trump. So you see there that Joe Biden won by a pretty large amount in the popular vote, nearly 5 points in total. And it was a pretty resounding victory. I mean, looking at the popular vote, had I taken away the electoral map, you probably would have thought he would have won by an Obama 2012 type margin against Donald Trump. But surprisingly enough, the election was actually only decided by 1 percentage point in the key battleground states of Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin. Considering Donald Trump got very close, you do have to ask the question, could he have won the election by losing the popular vote by 4 or 5 points? And the answer is yes. I actually referenced this back during the election cycle, and you can check that out at the top right corner of the screen. If I forget, please say something in the comment section down below. I am really hoping I don't. But I pretty much talked about how in a worst case for Trump, he could win the election. Obviously not worst because he's winning, but in the popular vote, a worst case, he would win the election but lose the popular vote by 5-6 million votes. And that was honestly a very realistic possibility. And in this video, by the end of it, you'll probably understand why that is and what that goes to show about our electoral system and the true representation for the American people on a nationwide scale. So let's take a look at our 2024, I don't know why I said 2024 electoral map. What I'm going to be showing you are the big states, the states that are large in electoral count, like California and Texas. On top of that, just adding it all the way up to nearly 270 electoral votes. So let's get through it. The first state I'm going to characterize, of course, is California. Then it's going to be Texas. Then it's going to be Florida and New York. So that brings us to 4 states with over 1/4 of the electorate already decided, with 4 states alone. Keep in mind, the Democratic Party has a realistic shot at all of these in 2024. Moving on, we can characterize Pennsylvania. We can characterize Illinois. We can characterize Ohio. Well, now we're around a third with just 7 states. Then we can add in the state of North Carolina and the state of Georgia and the state of Michigan, and that is a total of 10 states. That brings us to 256. This final state will bring us to 270, New Jersey. So with just 11 states, you can win the presidential election, despite 39 other states voting against you, including the District of Columbia, and you would still win the election. The scary thing for the GOP is that many of these states have already voted for the Democratic Party in recent elections. Let's take a look. This is 2020. All the states have voted for the Democrats. Add in 2008 and 2012, you leave Texas out, and that's it. This is why the Democratic Party has this large lead in the popular vote and has for the past few decades. Let's take a look at the popular vote winners and talk about why this happened and how the Democrats have pretty much just landed victories here because of their presence in key big states. Not necessarily battleground ones, but in key big states. So on your screen right now, you're looking at a graph of the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party comparison of the popular vote. Well, what you might notice right around this section, right after 1988, the Democratic Party won the popular vote in every single election except for 2004. That means they won back-to-back from 1992, 1996, 2000, skip one, 2008, 2012, 2016, and 2020. Not a single Republican victory. And in the 21st century, I think this is very interesting. We've had equal amount of time as Democratic presidents and Republican presidents, at least for terms won, which means there were 3 terms won for the Democrats and 3 terms won for the GOP. Yet the Democratic Party has won the popular vote 5 out of 6 times. Isn't that something? But looking at the popular vote here, what you'll notice is the Democratic Party is much more solid in the popular vote than they had been in the past. You know, the last time we saw a trend this large, first of all, we never have. But the last time we saw a trend similar to this was during World War II era under FDR, with the Democratic Party winning 4 terms and then it going into Harry S. Truman. But looking at what happened then, that was a very significant period of time for the Democrats. But now we're starting to see this trend and this time period expand. Because come 2024, even though we are talking about a return to normalcy on the presidential margin, I don't expect it to be competitive in the popular vote. When you're looking at what happened in 2008, the Democrats won the popular vote by 7 points. 2012, they won by 4 points. 2016, they won by 2 points. And then in 2020, they won by 4 to 5 points. Looking at the trend here, the GOP doesn't seem to be making any significant gains. And even though the margins were closer in 2016 and 2020, I mean, they were the same amount, just different winners. The popular vote margin was still somewhat reflective of what happened in 2012. You know, both of them just being nearly equal away from the 2012 margin for Barack Obama over Mitt Romney. And when I'm looking at the list of elections where the popular vote winner lost the election, the only time this has ever happened, coincidentally, is with the Democratic Party, at least when it's been a Democrat versus a Republican. We're not going to talk about when the Whig Party and the Democratic Republican Party were major political parties. We're talking about Democrat versus Republican. We're talking red versus blue, even though that wasn't really established until around Ronald Reagan's time period. That's not really a discussion for right now. But what we see is that every single time this has happened, where a non-popular vote winner has won the election, is through a Republican versus Democratic matchup with the Republican Party being the victor. Not once has a Democrat ever been elected without winning the popular vote. Seriously. I guess that might actually play into the title of them being the Democratic Party, but obviously that's not entirely what it means. But looking at the thing here, I think it's just very coincidental, to say the least. And the fact that it was completely possible for Donald Trump, I think, is also somewhat alarming for the Democrats. But if the Republican Party really wants to have this type of referendum as not, sorry, I didn't mean to say appreciated, I almost said it, as characterized by the media, they could never do that unless they win the popular vote. And it's become a struggle because of what you're seeing right now. On your screen, you see that the Democratic Party, since 2008 onward, has won 10 out of the 11 states required to reach 270. Let's go back to 2000, right? Where does the GOP stand? Did they win Texas? Yes. Did they win Georgia? Yes. North Carolina, Florida, Ohio. Okay. So now they're at a point where they're able to win, 2000 to 2016. We're not going to get into 2016 yet. So what you notice is that only 5 states move over. If you add in Donald Trump, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, well, you still leave the Democratic Party with 4 states. Let's go back into Bill Clinton. Do any of these states change? No. If you go back to 1988, I think that, California might be the only change out of all of this. And I think maybe Illinois. But, looking at what we are seeing now is the Democratic Party has locked down California. They've locked down Illinois. They've locked down New Jersey. They've locked down New York. They've remained competitive in Georgia and just flipped the state for the first time since 92. They just flipped Pennsylvania from 2016, just flipped Michigan. They won Ohio as recently as 2012. They won North Carolina as recently as 2008, won Florida as recently as 2012, and Texas is on the next list. This is what it would be after 2024 if the Democrats are able to win Texas. An automatic 270 with just 11 states. These 11 states could also drive the Democratic Party to victory on the popular vote. Seriously, because they have the numbers to do so. What we saw happen in 2016 was that Hillary Clinton lost the election, but she won the popular vote by 2.1%. How did this happen? Well, if you take a look at the change from 2012, you'll notice that some states like California actually shifted to the left. California went to Hillary Clinton by 30 points. The last time the Republican Party won the popular vote, California was won by single digits by the Democratic Party, and that was 2004. Looking at New York, another state, both Hillary Clinton and Trump were from this state at the time. Hillary Clinton won it by over 20 points, winning nearly 2 million more votes than Donald Trump. Where Hillary Clinton lost, big states like Florida and Texas, they were not 20-point margins. Florida was around 1 to 2 points. Texas was less than 10 points. And looking at them, yes, they are large. They're larger than New York vote-wise, but they're more competitive. The Democratic Party has solidified these safe states that haven't really changed in electoral presence, and the states with growing electoral presence are becoming increasingly more competitive. Florida and Texas are perfect examples. North Carolina and Georgia are perfect examples. These are states with growing populations, states with a newfound competitive nature where they previously weren't. All four of those states can be grouped into that under the Bush era to the Obama era. And then, looking at California and New York and, Illinois, these are all states that used to be, at least at some point, competitive. California was a state that was targeted by Bob Dole in 1996 and then by George W. Bush in 2004. And while the Republican Party still never won it, it still was a state that was not nearly as democratic as it is today, not nearly as left-wing as it is today. And I think that you also have to keep that in mind when you look at elections like the recall election, which is now being brought up into speculation for Gavin Newsom because Arnold Schwarzenegger was able to win a race there. Well, keep in mind that race was decided by single digits in 2004. I also want to take a look at 2004. I did this in the video back in December because it was very interesting. I showed you guys the 2020 margin in California and Texas versus the 2004 margin for John Kerry and George W. Bush. Texas went to Trump by 5.6% in 2004. It went to Bush by 23 points. California just went to Joe Biden by nearly 30 points. It went to John Kerry by just 9.9%. Well, how did this translate to overall vote share? Well, keep in mind the Democratic Party has been expanding the amount of votes they receive in these states. And in California in 2004, John Kerry won by a net 1.24 million votes. In Texas, George W. Bush won by a net 1.69 million votes. Well, now, the Democratic Party has reduced the margin of victory for the GOP in Texas, cutting it from 1.69 million the last time the GOP won the popular vote, down to just 0.631 million, a reduction of over 1 million votes. California increased by more than 1 million votes. I'll remind you the number. 1.24 million in 2004 for John Kerry. Today with Joe Biden, 5.1 million deficit for Donald Trump. And it's not just in California. It's not just in Texas. When you're looking in New York, it was won by over 20 points this time. Kerry won it by 18 percentage points. The margins were closer. When you look at Illinois, it was decided by, we don't need to spend too much time there. It was decided by 10 points. Now it's being decided by over 15. These states are solidifying. New Jersey was decided by 6.4%. This election was decided by 15.9%. So these populous states are not nearly as competitive as they were back in 2004. And looking at 2012, some of the states that Obama had arguably very good performances in certain swing states like Florida and Ohio and Iowa, the Democratic Party was lacking in other areas. They didn't win Colorado by 13.5 like Biden did. They weren't able to solidify Oregon and Washington the same way Biden was. Even looking at Illinois, there are comparable margins here. 17 points versus 16.9 when Obama was from the state. I think there is something here that shows that these populous states were getting more and more Democratic because there's no way that Biden should have done better than Obama after Obama had served as a senator from Illinois, but he did. There's no real reason as to why Biden should have done significantly better than John Kerry, but he did. California was a 3 times margin on the net gain and also the overall percentage. And that was a percentage in terms of margin of victory. And it has benefited the Democratic Party to a point where they have not lost the popular vote except for once since 1992. And the last time the Republican Party won it before then, they had a landslide. They won with 426 electoral votes. Ronald Reagan was just president, handing it over to George H.W. Bush. So from then on, the GOP got lucky once, and it still wasn't a very large margin. If you look at 2004, let's take a look at the actual numbers here. How much did the GOP win by in the popular vote? Well, they won by just 2.4%. You heard me. 2.4%. That is very interesting to me. That 2.4% was that number when Joe Biden was able to win by 4.5, when Hillary Clinton won by a comparable margin in the popular vote, when Barack Obama won by over 3 points in the popular vote and 7 points in 2008. And just looking at what the Republican Party needs to do to win elections, they no longer need the popular vote. This problem is really inconsequential for overall election winners. But then it comes to a point where it isn't inconsequential. It has been inconsequential for George W. Bush and for Donald Trump. But what you're seeing is now, while in 2016, the Democratic Party didn't think they had a realistic shot at Texas or possibly even Georgia at that point, they certainly did in the remaining states. Now both of these, 57 electoral votes after the 2020 census, could very well be states that are the most competitive and possibly left-leaning after 2024. Georgia might start out left-leaning for 2024. Texas might be left-leaning after 2024. But the problem is, the Democratic Party went from a point where they were competitive in California and New York and New Jersey and Illinois, and were losing Texas and Georgia and North Carolina big. They were competitive in Michigan, Ohio, and Florida. But now they're competitive in all of these states, or they've solidified them. I also want to take a look at the 2020 presidential election results with these big circles. They pretty much sort it by population. What you might notice is that there are certain states with very big circles in very small areas. For example, we take a look at the Chicago area, Cook County, Illinois. Joe Biden won by over 1 million votes here. Well, it's just one county. If you were looking at it on a flat map, what you might notice is that, in Cook County, it's just a solid blue, county. Neighboring Will County has hundreds of thousands of voters, and then other counties have much less than that. But they look similar in size, and it looks as if there's just one blue area. That's why you see this discussion of a sea of red when that really should not be used. Because what we see is that there are these big circles that might just come across as one county, but hold a lot of voters. And what you see is a lot of these circles come from these populated states. New York, California, even Texas. Not a lot of big red circles, right? Even Florida. Even though Trump won both Texas and Florida, a lot of the Democratic votes came from these states. A lot of Republican votes do as well. A lot of Republican votes come from California. Out of all of the states, California gave Trump the most votes for a singular state, even more than Texas, even though Trump only won mid-30s in terms of the vote share here, because of its populace. However, Biden won by a lot more, by double the margin. But just looking at the popular vote here, and the popular vote over the past few years, the Republican Party just hasn't had luck. Number one, because the American people don't fully support the Republican Party's agenda. The Republican Party is able to luck out through the electoral college system because the Democratic Party's base is in major cities. That's why these big circles are in very similar areas in inner cities and have very large populations. The Electoral College does not fairly represent big states like California, like New York, like Florida, and like Texas. And while they went differently, 2 and 2, for the GOP and the Democrats, what you have to notice is that, looking at the 2016 results and the 2000 results, people could argue the Electoral College did defy the majority. And while the Republican Party says, we're not going to let the inner cities rule the way this is, if this truly was a country built on quote-unquote democracy, and I understand that people argue we're in a republic, the Electoral College was a system put in place, it's still, that argument can still be made. And I think that while I'm not going to personally tell you how I feel about the Electoral College, I've made videos talking about what would happen or how we could fix it or how we could mathematically solve this problem. Spoiler alert, there isn't really a fix to an Electoral College, which is fundamentally a system that is going to disenfranchise certain areas and then prop up others. Wyoming and North and South Dakota are always going to be states that have more votes than they should, at least compared to California, Texas, and Florida. But overall, sometimes the Republican Party is saved by these quote-unquote smaller states, but states that have electoral representation, that are outside of the inner cities, that are rural states, that are able to drive the states to the right and just defy the popular vote. And, I mentioned that I was going to show you the House vote, and I think that I should. In 2018, we saw the Democratic Party win 54% of the House seats and 53% of the popular vote. They defeated the Republican Party by, I think this is a 7-point margin, but the final results were an 8.8% margin of victory in the popular vote for the Democratic Party. They won by a lot. In 2016, despite the Republican Party winning the presidential election, they didn't come to a point where they were super solid in the 2016 popular vote in the House. They won 55% of the seats, 55.4% actually, but they only won 49.1% of the popular vote, 48% for the Democratic Party, a margin of 1.1%. even in a year where the GOP was able to win 55% of the seats. Think about that. The Republicans left this election with a trifecta, and their best showing in the House was a 1.1% margin. In 2014, which was a very good year for the GOP, the Republicans won the popular vote by a larger amount. But in 2012, what you notice is the Democratic Party won the popular vote by 1.2%, yet did not win more seats than the GOP. In fact, they had a deficit here of 33 seats. Also, that brings up the consideration of gerrymandering and the unfair, House maps for some of these areas. If you're looking at Ohio, if you're looking at Maryland, you're looking at North Carolina, a lot of incorrectly or intentionally incorrectly drawn districts that are meant to be gerrymandered. But overall, what we notice is that the Republican Party never really has a strong performance in the popular vote. 2014 seems to be the exception to the rule. Even when they're winning the House majority, they're not winning the popular vote. It's not just presidential elections, it's also the House elections that show this. And for the Democratic Party to get comparable results, they need to win the popular vote by 7 points versus 1 point when the numbers are very similar following the elections. And, looking at the Democratic Party's ability to win the popular vote since 1992, it's something that they've been able to do because of their increased support in the inner cities, their increased support in these battleground states, in these very large states. California was comparable to, California was decided by a similar margin as Texas in 2016, California in 2004. Looking at the state trends here, California, New York, Illinois, New Jersey have gotten bluer, whereas Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, and Florida have gotten bluer as well. And that brings a lot of these states to a point where the Democrats can win 70 to 30 in California, or 66 to 33 in California, and then lose Texas by 50 to 45, or 52 to 47 in Florida. And they would still win the popular vote, but possibly lose the election. But they could win the popular vote because of states like California and New York. On top of that, these very large states that are battlegrounds now, the Democratic Party is getting a lot of their vote share, whereas the Republican Party really isn't from these big states. They may be getting a handful of 1 million votes, but if they're being defeated at a deficit of 5 million where they previously were losing by just 1, 2, 3 million, that starts to add up on the national level. Joe Biden won the popular vote by 7 million votes. He won by 4.5%. That was due to these big states. That would not have happened if we were talking about a 2004 type of map. Donald Trump might not have been able to win the presidency based off the electoral count in those states, but based off the margins then, I don't think the Democratic Party would have had as easy of a victory in the popular vote. Donald Trump could have been in a competitive position before. But moving forward, the problem lies in these bigger areas. Unless the GOP can start appealing to states like California and New York and New Jersey and Illinois in the future, I'm not hopeful for their chances to win the popular vote. Because these states are condensed, they have inner cities that drive the state so far to the left that it is incomprehensible to think that the GOP can ever make inroads in these states again. But we have to wait and see. 2024 is 3 years away. Things can happen, but the question is, will they? So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.